Welcome to the Hope this morning. We are so glad you're with us. Join with us as we worship and lift praise to our Heavenly Father. Who are we that you would be mindful of us? What do you see that's worth looking our way? We are free in ways that we never should be. Sweet release from the grip of these chains. Like angels dragging from the weight, my heart no longer can keep from singing. All that is within me, Christ, for you alone be glorified, Emmanuel, God with us. My heart sings a brand new song. The debt is paid. These chains are gone. Emmanuel, God with us. Lord, you know our hearts don't deserve your glory. Still you show a love we cannot afford. Like angels straying from the weight, my heart no longer can keep from singing. All that is within me, Christ, for you alone be glorified, Emmanuel, God with us. My heart sings a brand new song. The debt is paid. These chains are gone. Emmanuel, God with us. Such a tiny offering compared to Calvary. Nevertheless, we lay it at your feet. Such a tiny offering compared to Calvary. Nevertheless, we lay it at your feet. All that is within me, Christ, for you alone be glorified, Emmanuel, God with us. My heart sings a brand new song. The debt is paid. These chains are gone. Emmanuel, God with us.
bless you.
Now start over.
Let's just turn it over.
Just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, just as I am, and waking now to rid my soul of what not blood, to thee whose blood can cleanse each spot, O Lamb of God, I come, I come broken to be mended, I come wounded to be healed, I come desperate to be rescued, I come empty to be filled, I come guilty to be pardoned by the blood of Christ the Lamb, and I'm welcome with open arms, praise God, just as I am. Just as I am, I would be lost, but mercy and grace my freedom bought, and now to glory in your cross, O Lamb of God, I come, I come broken to be mended, I come wounded to be healed, I come desperate to be rescued, I come empty to be filled, I come guilty to be pardoned by the blood of Christ the Lamb, and I'm welcome with open arms, praise God, just as I am. I come broken to be mended, I come wounded to be healed, I come desperate to be rescued, I come empty to be filled, I come guilty to be pardoned by the blood of Christ the Lamb, and I'm welcome with open arms, praise God, just as I am. Praise God, just as I am. Just as I am.
P.J. Scraggins was delighted when he discovered that he was a perfect match for his wife Tracy, who had been told her lifelong battle with lupus was now requiring her to have a kidney transplant if she was going to live. But the next few days, as they did the testing, the good news became difficult news. PJ found out that his blood pressure was too high and they couldn't perform the operation. Refusing to accept the diagnosis, PJ went on a relentless fitness routine. He spent the next year losing 70 pounds so he could donate his kidney to his wife. Finally, in December of 2014, they got the green light. In February, they both went under the knife together. We both just feel amazing. I'm slowly getting back to work, making music. Tracy's making sure that she fully recovers. But this entire process has been amazing. Tracy, now 39, was 6 years old when she was first diagnosed with lupus, which affected her kidney functions. She was placed on a transplant list in 2013, just a few months after her 34-year-old sister, who also had lupus, had died following complications. Knowing that the 7-year wait might be too long for her, PJ, a self-employed musician, submitted himself to the evaluation to assess whether or not he could donate a kidney. And as I said, he found out he was a perfect match. However, the good news was tinged when the doctor said his size and, as we mentioned, his blood pressure would not allow the operation to go ahead. So PJ did what he needed to do, save his wife's life. He lost weight, got himself in shape. Today, Tracy says, my kidney function is at 100%. And it's the best that it's ever been, she told a reporter from Fox News. PJ said, it's just been amazing to know that I did everything that I could to give my wife a better quality of life is just the best thing that we've ever experienced. We are so happy. Today, as we continue on this series, thinking about the importance and necessity of you and I living a focused life during a pandemic, I want us today to focus on what should be the defining characteristic of Christianity, the defining characteristic of Christians everywhere, and it's reflected in that article of that couple, and that's love. Well, Jesus was once asked, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus' response is in Mark chapter 12, beginning at verse 29, when he says, the most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. Jesus also said in John chapter 13, beginning at verse 34, so now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Now, too often as followers of Jesus Christ, we try to make our primary identification something other than love. If you're a real Christian, you'll vote for, and then fill in the blank. If you're a real Christian, you'll do these things, but you won't do these things. Fill in the blank. About 35 years ago, while I was a summer youth pastor in a church in northern Illinois, I took a young man in the youth group out for lunch. And we had ordered our food, sat down, we said a prayer over our meal and started to eat. And as we're eating, a gentleman walks up to us, kind of stands right in front of us by our table, gets my attention and asks me this question. He said, do you know where I can buy a lottery ticket at? I said, man, I really don't know. I looked at the young man who was with me. He didn't know. I said, sorry, we can't help you. And he stood there for a second, he smiled, and he said, well, at least I know you're real Christians, because I saw you pray. And had you known where to buy a lottery ticket, I would have known it wasn't real. There are many things that people do to signal their virtue to the rest of the world. For this gentleman, it was if you knew where to buy a lottery ticket at or not. But in all reality, it comes down to this. In 1 John 4, verses 7 and 8, we read, Dear friends, let us love one another. For love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Now we know we're supposed to love God. We know we're supposed to love people. But what we sometimes fail to grasp is that loving God and loving people is not representing two different kinds of love. It's not representing two different levels of love. Jesus is making very clear in these verses that our expression of love for one another is to be a reflection of the extent of our love for God. So today, we're going to focus on this idea of living a life of love. We're going to think about three components of God's command to you and I as followers of Jesus Christ to love one another. Number one, loving one another is required. It's a command. You see, love one another is not a suggestion. It's not a guideline. It's not just some random idea that came into Jesus' head that he decided to say. Instead, it is plainly stated, it is a command. This is what I want you to do. Love one another. The Apostle John wrote in 1 John 3, verse 11, this is the message you have heard from the beginning. We should love one another. John's message is reflecting what Jesus said in that earlier passage that we read just a moment ago from John 13, verse 34, where Jesus said, so now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Now the one another in Jesus' command does not refer to just the people that you and I like. He's not just talking about the people that have the same opinion as I have. One another is much broader than that, as we'll see. And until we open our eyes to the fact that the defining characteristic of the Christian life is love, we will be ineffective at fulfilling God's plan for our lives to love one another. And that's true for us as individuals, and it's also true for us as churches. Now, the command to love one another is non-negotiable. Living a life of love means that we learn to look beyond the little cocoons that we sometimes wrap around ourselves for protection. And we have to recognize what is going on in the lives of those people around us. Now, we all know what those cocoons look like. You drive into your neighborhood, you pull into your driveway, you hit the remote, your garage door opens up, you drive your car into the garage, you hit the remote again, the door closes, you go into your house, and you never have any interaction with the people around you. But when we open up our eyes and get outside of that cocoon, we see that people around us are in need, that they're hurting. And like so many of our friends and neighbors during this pandemic, they just aren't comfortable with broadcasting it. They're just not comfortable with sharing their struggles and the pain that they're going through. They don't know how to share with others. And so our challenge then in loving one another is that we have to open our eyes. We have to step outside of our cocoons. We have to make sure that we are taking the first step, that we are going the second mile, that we are making the one to initiate the process to get to know one another so that we can love one another. It's a requirement. It's God's command. Number two, loving one another is action. It's action. 1 John chapter 3 again, verses 17 and 18. Says, if someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. Now, sometimes we live like all that we need to do is feel bad about somebody else's problems, and that's good enough. We've done what we need to do. But the point that Jesus is making, the point that John is making, the point that is made throughout the New Testament is that love is expressed through the things that we do. Love is expressed through action. When Jesus says that we are to love one another, he wasn't saying that these are feelings that I want you to have. He's saying these are actions that I want you to do. So loving one another requires more than just words. requires more than just feelings. It requires action. And it's my prayer that through this ongoing pandemic, that as Americans, we can arrive at the place that we stop only focusing on what divides us, we stop focusing on what's different about us, and we begin focusing on the things that unite us, the things that we have in common, and that we can then look for ways to show God's love to people that we come in contact with while we're out grocery shopping. It's amazing how people react to one another. I went into the post office this morning before I came over to record this message, and stopped at the post office box to pick up the church's mail. And there was a guy waiting in line, standing at the door, refusing to let me in. He says, "Can't come in, there's only supposed to be 5. Well, somebody left, and I went in, and he gave me this dirty look. I walked over to the post office, or to where the post office boxes are, got the mail, and as I'm walking out, another couple starts to walk in, and I thought this guy was going to deck him. He says, "Can't you read the sign? There's only supposed to be 5 people in here." And I thought, we have to be careful that as we're going through this together, that we figure out a way to be nice to each other. And the only way that I know to do that is by allowing my love for God to reflect in how I express love to other people. So loving one another is required. It's a commandment by God. Number 2, it's action. It requires us to do something, not just feel something, but do something. Number 3, loving one another is sacrificial. Again, back to 1 John chapter 3. In verse 16, the apostle writes, "This is how we know what real love is. Jesus gave his life for us, so we should give our lives for our brothers and sisters." On October 20th, 2009, a suicide bomber entered the women's campus of Islamabad's International Islamic University in Pakistan. He shot the guard on duty and made his way towards the cafeteria where hundreds of female students were eating lunch. The janitor on duty that day was a young man named, and I'm going to destroy his name, but his name was Pervaz Meshi. It was his first week on the job. His salary was set at less than $60 a month. Pervaz intercepted the bomber in the doorway and prevented him from going further into the cafeteria. The terrorist detonated the device, killing the janitor, himself, and 3 others. Had he made it into the cafeteria, the death toll would have been far worse. The twist on this story is that Pervaz was a Christian. In Pakistan, believers are in the minority, and traditionally they are among the poorest in the communities. But this man came to be considered a hero. He gave his life to save the lives of hundreds of female students, and as one professor said, he rose above the barriers of caste, creed, and sectarianism, and despite being a Christian, he sacrificed his life to save the lives of Muslim girls. One of the students went on to say later in an interview, "He's now a legend to us." Now the fact is, most of us listening to me today, you're never going to have to sacrifice your life for another person. But we will have to sacrifice some time. We'll probably have to sacrifice some money, some attention. We'll probably have to sacrifice some of our time off or our plans for a week or whatever the case may be. We may have to sacrifice and put off purchasing something that we wanted to buy, or we might have to just sacrifice some level of comfort, all for the purpose of showing love to someone else. In the book of Philippians, the Apostle Paul wrote in chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, "When you do things, do not let selfishness or pride be your guide. Instead, be humble and give more honor to others than to yourselves. Do not be interested only in your own life, but be interested in the lives of others. When he said that, he was saying in effect that this is what loving one another looks like. You look out for another person means that you're willing to put your own wants, your own interests, your own needs on a back burner so that you can help someone else. Throughout the New Testament, we're told over and over again to love one another. And we're not to love one another with a second-rate form of love. We're not to love one another with a surface level or a convenient level of love. We are to love one another with a sacrificial love, with a love that has actions built right into it. Well, once when Jesus was telling a story, we call them parables, he was telling a story about the final judgment. And in Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 34, we read this. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then those righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality? Or naked and give you clothing? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth. When you did this for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me." So Jesus makes it clear that our expression of love for others reflects the extent of our love for God. We are to love one another in the same non-negotiable way that we strive to love God Himself. A love that is expressed through what we do, our actions, even to the point of sacrifice. So today, in closing, let me ask each of us these two questions while we still find ourselves in the middle of this pandemic. Question number one: who do you need to show love to today? Who do you and I need to show love towards today? Question number two is, how will you and I begin to reflect our love for God through loving each other? Let me pray for us this morning. Father, I think we all recognize, as this shelter in order goes on, as the pandemic is still affecting so many people, I think we all recognize that we're getting tired of this. This is going on too long. It is too difficult to do the things that we need to do, that we want to do. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we all would admit that we have some of those thoughts, some of those feelings. And we ask and pray this morning, as we are again focusing on the necessity, the importance of us living a more focused life in the midst of the pandemic, that you would help us to focus on how we can live a life that reflects your love to our world, to that neighbor that is kind of annoying, to that person in the post office that's not doing what we think they should do, to the long lines at the grocery store, to the people that think everybody else now should do everything the way that they're doing it, and it just goes on and on and on. So Father, we ask and pray that you'll help us today to realize that you require us to love one another, and that our love for other people needs to be a reflection of our love for you. You ask us to not just feel, but that there needs to be action. There needs to be some concrete things that we do to express love to others. And then you challenge us to be sacrificial. To not just think about me, to not just think about my comforts and my needs, but to think about how maybe I can help this other person. I was talking to someone on the phone this week, and they shared with me that they've heard about a group of younger people that are signing up to be grocery shoppers for some senior citizens in their community. And I just think that's amazing. I think that's awesome. I think that's something that is an expression of love to some people that are really seriously struggling. And I ask and pray that there would be millions of people across our nation that look for ways to show love to one another, look for ways to love our neighbor in the midst of an ongoing struggle called COVID-19. And I just ask and pray that you will help me to reflect my love for you in how I love others. Guide and direct us, Father. Help us in every way. And we will give you the praise for what you do. For we ask it in the marvelous name of our Lord and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I want to thank you again for joining us today. And I pray that you'll have a great day. Enjoy, hopefully, some nice weather. And just know that God is able to help us to love one another.